Okay, so welcome to this next video in which we are discussing shear stress, or hemodynamic shear stress, and the endothelium-derived relaxation factor, and how when the shear stress goes up, the release of the endothelium-derived relaxation factor from endothelial cells also goes up. So we're exploring the pathways by which that actually happens. Now, the main pathway that we've seen is this pathway involving the TRPV4 receptors, where when shear stress goes up, the TRPV4 receptors become activated. They allow calcium to move in from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid. Calcium binds to calmodulin to form calcium-calmodulin complexes. Calcium-calmodulin complexes then activate the eNOS enzyme, which starts producing nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is the endothelium-derived relaxation factor. Okay, we've also seen that when shear stress goes up, it causes the phosphorylation of tyrosine residues on this platelet endothelium cell adhesion molecule 1 protein, which is in the membrane of the endothelial cells. That then, through some unknown signaling pathway, leads to the phosphorylation of serine residues on the eNOS enzyme, or the endothelium nitric oxide synthase. Okay, and that also activates eNOS and means that we're going to produce more nitric oxide, which is the endothelium-derived relaxation factor. Now what we're going to look at is a third pathway, which is important. Okay, so we need to discuss our old friend, the nitric oxide synthase again. So here's this picture I drew earlier. Okay, so when the eNOS enzyme is producing nitric oxide, there is a very important cofactor for this reaction, basically, which I didn't mention at the time, but I'm going to mention now. Basically, this little square that I've drawn here, which I'll colour in turquoise, I think. So this little square here is a binding site for a very important cofactor of this enzyme, without which the enzyme will not function. And in fact, it's very dangerous if it doesn't have this. So I'll explain why it's dangerous if it doesn't have this later. It still functions, but it doesn't make nitric oxide anymore. Instead, it makes superoxide, which is not good. Okay, so tetrahydrobiopterin. Biopterin. Okay, so tetrahydrobiopterin is the cofactor for this eNOS enzyme, which needs to bind to this little turquoise box which I've drawn here. Now, tetrahydrobiopterin is often denoted BH4, the B standing for biopterin, and then the H standing for the hydro, and then 4 times tetrahydrobiopterin. Now, tetrahydrobiopterin is limited within the cell potentially. So if we're going to turn on all these eNOS enzymes and get them to start producing nitric oxide, then we need to produce more tetrahydrobiopterin, because if tetrahydrobiopterin is not present, then it's very, very dangerous, basically. You can end up producing superoxide rather than nitric oxide. Okay, so basically, the pathway which I'm going to discuss with you now is a pathway by which the production of tetrahydrobiopterin goes up in response to shear stress. Okay, and again, it's quite holy. It's not completely understood. So here's our endothelial cell. Okay, now in response, when shear stress goes up, so let's say hemodynamic shear stress has gone up, the first thing that we know is that it seems to activate the casein kinase enzyme, okay, specifically casein kinase 2. Okay, so this CSK here, this stands for casein kinase 2, okay, which is a kinase enzyme, so casein kinase 2. So I'll draw it as having this little active site here. So here's our casein kinase 2 enzyme, which has become active in response to shear stress going up. Now, what is the casein kinase 2 enzyme going to do? How does it increase the level of tetrahydrobiopterin in this endothelial cell so that we don't run out of this essential cofactor for our eNOS enzyme? Well, basically, what it's going to do is it's going to phosphorylate a serine residue on another enzyme. So I'll draw this enzyme out here for lack of space. Okay? And this other enzyme is something that's often abbreviated to GTP-CH1. Okay? And basically, this stands for the GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme. So GTP cyclohydrolase 1. Okay, so let me give GTP cyclohydrolase a colourful outline. So we'll colour it in orange here. And basically, when casein kinase 2 enzymes become activated, they are going to add phosphate groups. They're going to add a phosphate group onto a specific serine residue on this GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme. And it's specifically added onto serine at position 81. So what that means is if you actually returned this GTP cyclohydrolase enzyme back to its actual primary polypeptide structure, so you spread it out, you unfolded it, and you spread it out into a linear polypeptide, and you counted the amino acids. So here's the first amino acid, here's the second. If you went on all the way up to the 81th amino acid, it would be a serine, and we're phosphorylating that 81th serine, basically. Not the 81th serine, that 81th amino acid, which happens to be a serine. Okay, so that's how the casein kinase 2 enzyme activates the GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme. Now, what does the GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme do? Well, basically, it produces tetrahydrobiopterin. So it's going to produce this BH4 cofactor here, which is tetrahydrobiopterin. So tetrahydrobiopterin. Right, okay, so to illustrate how important tetrahydrobiopterin is in the production of nitric oxide, what we can do is we can block this enzyme, this GTP cyclohydrolase, with a drug known as DAHP. DAHP is a drug which will block this GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme. So I want to discuss with you what does DAHP stand for and what's the structure of this molecule. And don't worry, it's easier than 4-alpha PDD. Okay, so DAHP, this stands for 2,4-diamino, so that's the DA here, diamino 6-hydroxypyrimidine. Okay, and this is not a difficult molecule to understand. 6-hydroxypyrimidine. All you need to know really is what a pyrimidine ring is, which hopefully you should know because the pyrimidines are they're the organic bases in DNA. So pyrimidines are very important in the structure of DNA. Okay, so pyrimidine rings, for those who don't know, are basically modified benzene rings. So if I draw for you the structure of benzene, just to remind you of this. Benzene is basically a 6-carbon ring, where you have alternating double and single bonds. So here is the carbon ring, and then off all of the carbons you have a single hydrogen. So this is the structure of the benzene ring, which is everywhere in organic chemistry. Okay, so it's a very, very important compound in chemistry. Very carcinogenic, the actual pure benzene, but it's used all over chemistry, all over biochemistry, all over organic chemistry, everywhere, basically. In life, benzene is used all over the place. Not in its pure form like this, but integrated into larger structures. Okay, so the pyrimidine ring, the pure pyrimidine ring then, is a modified benzene ring where you stick in 2 nitrogens basically, okay, instead of 2 of the carbons, and the nitrogens have to be positioned with 1 carbon in between them. So you can't have a nitrogen here and then a nitrogen here. They have to be in this specific positions relative to one another, so they have to have a single carbon in between the 2 of them. And again, you have alternating double and single bonds. So it's very similar structure to benzene, and again you're going to have hydrogens, but this time you're not going to have them off the nitrogens, because nitrogen only needs 3 bonds, unlike carbon which needs 4. So this now is the structure of the pyrimidine ring. So when people talk about pyrimidine, this is what they mean. Okay, that's pure pyrimidine. I don't know whether pure pyrimidine is very carcinogenic as well as pure benzene, but pure pyrimidine is not something you will see much in biology. Instead, you'll see it integrated into other larger molecules, such as DAHP, which is 2,4-diamino 6-hydropyrimidine. Okay, so how do you label the members of this ring? Well, basically you pick one of these nitrogens and you call that the first one. And then you go round to this nitrogen first. You don't go round this way, you go round this way, the way that you'll get to the nitrogen, the second nitrogen quicker. So nitrogen's deemed as being more important than carbon. So this is the first, this is second, this is third, this is fourth, this is fifth, this is sixth. And the way you've done that is just so that the numbers that are given to the 2 nitrogens are as small as they could possibly be, because they're just deemed as being more important than carbon. Right, so then we're going to stick amino groups of the 2nd and the 4th carbon and a hydroxy group of the 6th carbon, so it's easy. Okay, so let's draw this structure one more time. Okay, so here's our 6-membered ring with the alternating single and double bonds here. So that should be a double bond. And then we need a hydroxyl group of the 6th, so it's 6-hydroxy here. We need an amino group of the 2nd group carbon here. So this is an amino group. And we need an amino group of that 4th carbon down here. And then a hydrogen there. So this is the structure of 2,4-diamino DA 6-hydroxy H-pyrimidine P. Okay, and basically this is a drug which will inhibit the GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme. Right, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to get our HUVEC cells, we're going to expose them to a shear stress, and we're going to give them this drug, 2,4-diamino 6-hydroxypyrimidine, and see what happens. So basically, what's going to happen is when you expose them to the increased shear stress, you're going to get the activation of the eNOS enzyme by those 2 pathways which we've seen already. The TRPV4 enzyme, the TRPV4 channel will open, allow calcium in. Calcium will bind to calmodulin, forming calcium-calmodulin complexes, which will activate the eNOS enzyme. Similarly, PCAM1, the platelet endothelial cell adhesion molecule 1, is going to be activated. It's going to have its tyrosine residues phosphorylated, and that will then lead to the phosphorylation of eNOS, which will activate it. So eNOS is going to be working really, really hard to try and make nitric oxide, but if we don't now produce any more tetrahydrobiopterin, because we've inhibited this GTP cyclohydrolase 1 enzyme with our DAHP drug, then what's going to happen? The eNOS won't have its cofactor, and if it doesn't have its cofactor, it can't make nitric oxide. Instead, it tries its best to do it, but instead, what happens? Let me explain to you what's going to happen. So you remember me telling you that what would happen is the reduced NADP would bind to this site here, and it would pass its electrons on to the flavin adenine dinucleotide, then to the flavin mononucleotide, then to the ferrous cation, and then to oxygen. Well, basically, if the tetrahydrobiopterin isn't there, basically, what happens is that you just get 1 electron passing to oxygen, okay? And you add, basically, a single electron to oxygen. Now, what happens if you take an oxygen molecule and give it a single electron? So let's draw some dot and cross diagrams out for the structure of oxygen. Okay, so oxygen, remember, has 2 lone pairs. So we'll draw this oxygen atom's electrons in crosses, and we'll draw this oxygen atom's electrons as dots. Okay, and then they share electrons like so to form 2 double bonds. Now, what's going to happen is basically we're going to chuck another electron in here. So, what will happen is one of these oxygen atoms will get that extra electron. So let's have this extra electron denoted as a cross, and let's give it to this one here. So this oxygen atom will now break one of these bonds here, and it will pair its electrons. So it's going to break this bond here, so it's going to say, actually, I don't want to share with you anymore. So it will give this dot back to this oxygen atom here, and it will take its cross back, and then it will pair that cross now with this extra electron that we've just chucked at it. Okay, so it will now have 3 lone pairs of electrons, and then it will share 1 pair of electron with this other oxygen. Okay, so here are this other oxygen now. The problem is that this other oxygen now has an unpaired electron. This molecule here, oxygen singly bonded to oxygen, where one of the oxygens now has a negative charge because it's just taken an electron without taking a positive charge, and the other has a free radical, an electron that is unpaired. This molecule is known as superoxide, okay, and is incredibly reactive and dangerous. Okay, it's denoted O2, and then you put a minus up there to denote this negative charge here, and you put a dot here to denote the free radical. So this is how you denote superoxide. It is not good, basically. So if you activate eNOS without increasing your production of this tetrahydrobiopterin, eNOS, instead of producing nitric oxide, produces superoxide. Now, superoxide actually reacts with nitric oxide, so not only are you going to not produce nitric oxide from the eNOS, but the nitric oxide that was being produced, which has already been produced, is going to react with superoxide, so that's going to reduce nitric oxide further. So superoxide is not a good molecule, basically, and you do need this increase in tetrahydrobiopterin synthesis whenever you activate eNOS. Okay, so that's it for this video.